Today, I'm going to tell you a story. Not one you'll find in the news. Not one that starts with a headline. But it's real, and it changed the lives of everyone involved. It's about a boy, a backpack, a phone call, and how, on one quiet street, truth and prejudice collided in broad daylight. Before we jump in, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if the story moves you in any way, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, they matter. Alright, let's begin. It was a warm afternoon on Oak Creek Lane, the kind where the light stretches out over perfect lawns and everything looks calm on the surface. But for 13-year-old Leo, that calm always carried an edge. He walked that sidewalk every day, past the same rose bushes, the same cracked pavement shaped like lightning, the same house where someone always watched. That day, his backpack was heavy, but not with just books. Inside it was his future, his brilliance, and a world built on equations most adults wouldn't even understand. What he didn't know was that someone had already decided who he was, and they were about to make a call that would flip his world upside down. Leo adjusted the heavy backpack on his shoulders. The weight was a good kind of weight. It wasn't just books. It was potential. Inside, nestled between a worn copy of a calculus textbook and a sheaf of graph paper, was the world he was building for himself, one equation at a time. His tutoring session had run late. Dr. Anya Sharma, his mentor, had lost track of time while they were exploring the elegant complexities of differential equations. "You have a gift, Leo," she'd said, her eyes bright with intellectual fire. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." He carried those words like a shield. They were necessary. As he rounded the corner onto his own street, he felt the familiar prickle on the back of his neck. He didn't need to look up to know its source. From the pristine bay window of the two-story colonial on the corner, Mrs. Gable was watching. Her silhouette was a fixture, a permanent part of the neighborhood's architecture, as unmoving and judgmental as a stone gargoyle. Leo kept his eyes fixed forward, his sneakers making soft, rhythmic sounds on the pavement. He knew the narrative she was writing in her mind. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, the unofficial uniform of teenagers everywhere. But on him, she saw a threat. He was a new variable in her perfectly ordered suburban equation, one she couldn't solve and therefore didn't trust. His family had moved in 6 months ago, and while most neighbors offered welcoming smiles or plates of cookies, Mrs. Gable had offered only a cold, scrutinizing silence. He could feel her gaze tracking him, a physical weight as tangible as his backpack. It followed him from the oak tree to the mailbox, from the curb to the edge of his own driveway. He hated it. It made his own street feel like foreign territory. He quickened his pace, his house just a few hundred feet away, a sanctuary of warmth and understanding. But he wouldn't make it. What happened next started not with a bang, but with a quiet, menacing glide. A police cruiser, stark white and blue, turned onto the street, its movements slow and deliberate, predatory. It slid past him, then pulled a sharp U-turn, its tires whispering on the asphalt. The engine cut, and for a heart-stopping moment, the world was silent, save for the distant hum of a lawnmower. Then, the silence was shattered by the sudden, blinding flash of red and blue lights. They strobed across Leo's face, painting the trees and houses in frantic, anxious colors. A door clicked open. A voice, hard and official, cut through the air. "You, stop right there. Hands where I can see them." Inside her home, Eleanor Gable lowered her phone from her ear, a thin, triumphant smile gracing her lips. "Yes, he's right outside my house," she had told the dispatcher, her voice a carefully calibrated blend of fear and civic duty. "He's been casing the neighborhood for weeks. He just looks suspicious. He doesn't belong here." She watched through the blinds as the officer stepped out of the car, her heart swelling with a grim sense of righteousness. She was simply protecting her community. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The world narrowed to the flashing lights and the approaching officer. He slowly, carefully, raised his hands, the sleeves of his hoodie sliding down his wrists. His mind, usually a swift river of numbers and logic, felt like a frozen lake. He had done nothing wrong. He was just walking home. Yet, here he was, illuminated and accused under the afternoon sun on his own street. The first officer was tall and broad, with a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl. His name tag read Miller. He moved with a heavy, deliberate confidence that bordered on aggression. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he demanded, his voice leaving no room for discussion. I live here," Leo managed to say, his own voice sounding small and reedy. He gestured with his head towards his house, just 4 doors down. "That's my house. The one with the blue door. I didn't ask where you live. I asked what you're doing," Miller snapped back, his eyes narrowing. "Got a call about a suspicious individual. Matches your description." A second officer, younger and with a leaner build, had gotten out of the passenger side. His name tag read Evans. He stood a few feet back, his expression more neutral, more observant. He watched Leo, but he was also watching his partner, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "I was just walking home," Leo said, trying to keep his voice steady. "From my tutoring session." Miller let out a short, skeptical laugh. "Tutoring? Right. What's in the backpack?" The question wasn't a question. It was an accusation. To him, the backpack wasn't a school bag. It was a container for contraband, a sack of secrets. Leo swallowed hard. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. He was being treated like a criminal, his words twisted and dismissed. He saw a curtain twitch in Mrs. Gable's window and felt a fresh wave of humiliation. This wasn't just an interrogation. It was a public shaming. "It's just my books," Leo said quietly. "Take it off." Slowly, Miller commanded. "Put it on the ground." Leo complied, his movements careful and precise. He slid the heavy pack from his shoulders, the straps whispering against his hoodie, and placed it gently on the grass of the sidewalk verge. The simple act felt like a surrender. He felt vulnerable, stripped of the one thing that defined him. His brain, his books, his work, it was all in there, about to be pawed through on the side of the road like common garbage. "Step back," Miller ordered. He nudged the backpack with the toe of his polished boot, as if it might bite him. Evans took a step forward, his gaze fixed on the bag. "Sir, with all due respect, they're my school things." Leo tried one last time, a plea for reason. "My homework is in there." "We'll be the judge of that," Miller grunted. He crouched down, his hand hovering over the main zipper. The tension was a coiled spring. Leo held his breath, bracing for the inevitable discovery of nothing. Nothing but the tools of a dedicated student. What would the officer do then? Would he apologize? Or would he find some other reason to justify this stop, this humiliation? What happened next changed the trajectory of everyone's day, and of several lives. Miller yanked the zipper open with a rough, grating sound. He began pulling items out, his movements careless. First came the thick calculus textbook. He flipped through it dismissively and tossed it onto the grass. Next came a spiral notebook. He opened it, his eyes scanning the pages with a blank, uncomprehending look. That's when Officer Evans moved closer, his professional curiosity piqued. He leaned over his partner's shoulder, his eyes falling on the open notebook, and he froze. The pages weren't filled with doodles or class notes. They were covered, from margin to margin, in elegant, flowing script. But it wasn't words. It was the language of the universe. Complex equations, geometric proofs, intricate diagrams of particle collisions and wave functions. It was mathematics so far beyond high school level that it looked like a foreign language. Miller saw meaningless scribbles. Evans saw brilliance. "Hold on a second, Frank," Evans said, his voice quiet but firm. He reached down and gently took the notebook from Miller's hand. He turned a page, his eyes widening slightly. This is advanced quantum mechanics. Miller looked up, annoyed. It's gibberish. Kids probably just copying it from somewhere to look smart. But Evans wasn't listening. He was looking at Leo, truly looking at him for the first time. The baggy hoodie and the nervous posture faded away, replaced by the image of the mind that could produce the work in his hands. He knelt and reached into the now open backpack himself, his movements respectful, a stark contrast to Miller's roughness. His fingers brushed past a protractor, a scientific calculator, and then a small, framed photograph tucked into an interior pocket. He carefully pulled it out. The photo showed a proud-looking man with kind eyes, so much like Leo's, dressed in a sharp suit. He was standing on a stage, shaking the hand of a 4-star general. Pinned to the man's chest was the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, one of the highest civilian honors awarded by the United States government. Evans's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. He'd seen it on the news, in articles, in departmental briefings. He looked from the photograph to the boy standing nervously on the sidewalk. The resemblance was undeniable. "Oh my God," Evans whispered, the sound barely audible over the hum of the idling car. He stood up slowly, holding the photo like a sacred object. He turned to his partner, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "Frank," he said, his voice tight, "do you have any idea who this is?" Miller squinted at the photo, then at Leo, his irritation giving way to confusion. "No." "Who?" "That's Dr. Alistair Finch," Evans said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. He looked at Leo, his eyes filled with an apology that words could not yet convey. "And this is his son." The name hung in the air, heavy and significant. Dr. Alistair Finch, the legendary physicist and cryptographer from Caltech. The man who had revolutionized secure communications for the military, whose work was credited with saving countless lives. The national hero who had passed away from a sudden illness just a year ago. The power dynamic on that quiet suburban street didn't just shift. It shattered and reassembled in an instant. Miller's face went slack, the color draining from it. The aggressive posture, the sneer, the suspicion. It all evaporated, replaced by a pale, gaping awe. He looked from the photo in Evans's hand to the calculus book on the grass, to the notebook filled with genius, and finally to the 13-year-old boy he had just treated like a street criminal. The boy was not a threat. He was a legacy. I didn't know," Miller stammered, the words hollow and inadequate. Evans ignored him. He took a step toward Leo, his demeanor completely transformed. The barrier between officer and civilian was gone, replaced by simple human respect. "Leo," he said, using the boy's name for the first time, his voice gentle. "I am so sorry. For this. For all of this." Leo just nodded, his throat tight with 1,000 unsaid things. He watched as the pieces clicked into place for the officers, not because of who he was, but because of who his father had been. A part of him felt a surge of vindication, but it was tangled with a deep, aching sadness. Why did it take a photograph of a famous man to make them see him? The immediate aftermath was a blur of frantic, clumsy attempts at apology. Officer Miller, now stammering and deferential, quickly gathered Leo's books from the grass, dusting them off with an awkward reverence as if they were holy relics. His earlier contempt had curdled into a thick, visible shame. He couldn't seem to make eye contact with the boy he had so casually terrorized. It was Officer Evans who took control. He handed the framed photo back to Leo with the care one might reserve for a priceless artifact. "We are going to handle this, Leo. I promise you," he said, his voice low and sincere. Then he turned, his jaw set, and his gaze fell upon the house with the pristine bay window. "Frank, stay with him. Make sure he's okay." Without another word, Evans strode across the lawn, his boots leaving decisive prints in the soft grass. He didn't knock on Mrs. Gable's door. He pounded on it, 3 sharp raps that echoed down the quiet street. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Eleanor Gable peered out, her face a mask of feigned concern. "Is everything all right, officer?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "No, ma'am, it is not," Evans said, his tone as cold and hard as steel. "We're here because of a 911 call you placed regarding a suspicious individual. Can you describe for me exactly what was suspicious about that boy?" Mrs. Gable faltered, her composure cracking under his direct, unblinking stare. "Well, he's always wandering around. His clothes. Evans cut her off, his voice rising slightly. "He's wearing a hoodie and jeans, ma'am. He was walking on a public sidewalk to his own home." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Do you know who that boy is? That's Leo Finch. His father was Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who did more to protect this country than you or I ever will. That suspicious individual you reported is likely one of the brightest young minds in this state, and you called the police on him for the crime of walking home." The woman's face paled. The triumphant righteousness she had felt just minutes before collapsed into horrified embarrassment. She saw her other neighbors peeking from their windows, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disapproval. Her perfect, ordered world was crumbling around her. I was just being cautious," she stammered. "No, ma'am," Evans corrected her sternly. "You were being prejudiced, and you wasted valuable emergency resources to do it. A formal report will be filed for misuse of the 911 system. I suggest you think long and hard about that before you decide to protect your community again." He turned his back on her before she could respond, leaving her standing in her doorway, exposed and shamed before the entire neighborhood. When he returned to Leo, he found him quietly putting his books back into his bag. Miller stood by uselessly, a statue of regret. Evans knelt beside Leo. "Let me help you with that," he said softly. Together, in silence, they repacked the bag. Evans then stood and offered Leo his hand to help him up. "We can drive you home," Evans offered. "It's the least we can do." Leo shook his head. "No, thank you. I can walk. It's not far." He needed the final few hundred feet to himself to process the jarring shift from fear to vindication. He just wanted to be home. Evans understood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Leo," he said, pressing it into the boy's hand. "That's my personal cell number on the back. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. If you want to talk about your father's work, about physics, I studied engineering before I joined the force. I'd be honored to listen." For the first time, a genuine, small smile touched Leo's lips. He nodded, clutching the card. "Thank you, Officer Evans." He shouldered his backpack, the weight feeling different now, not just potential but recognized worth. He turned and walked the final stretch to the house with the blue door, leaving the 2 officers and the flashing lights behind him. That incident did not fade away. For Officer Evans, it became a turning point. He saw with blinding clarity how easily the system he represented could be weaponized by prejudice, and how close his partner had come to trampling on something precious. Within a month, he submitted a proposal to his captain. It was for a new community initiative, STEM and Shields. The program aimed to pair officers with an interest in science and technology with gifted kids from all neighborhoods, providing mentorship, resources, and, most importantly, building bridges of trust. He used the story of his encounter with a brilliant young physicist as the core of his pitch, protecting Leo's identity but championing his spirit. The program was approved. It started small, with just a few officers and a handful of students, but it grew. It changed perceptions on both sides. It showed kids that a uniform could hold a person who cared, and it showed officers that a kid in a hoodie could be a future Nobel laureate. For Mrs. Gable, The consequences were a slower, quieter burn. The formal warning for misusing 911 was just the beginning. The story, in hushed tones, spread through the neighborhood. The welcoming smiles she received became cooler, the friendly waves less frequent. She was no longer seen as the guardian of the community, but as the source of its shame. Her roses still bloomed, but fewer people stopped to admire them. She had built her world on a foundation of judgment, and now she was isolated within it. And for Leo, the change was profound. The fear and humiliation of that day left a scar, but it was not a disabling one. It was a reminder that the world was not always logical or fair. But Officer Evans's actions and the subsequent program he launched taught him a different lesson. That one person's integrity could push back against the darkness. He never had to use the officer's card, but knowing there was a comfort. He continued his studies with a renewed fire, driven not just by his own passion, but by the weight of his father's legacy and the knowledge that his work mattered. Years later, Leo stood on a different kind of stage, bathed not in the strobing red and blue of police lights, but in the warm, steady glow of auditorium spotlights. He was accepting the prestigious Chancellor's Scholarship to a top university. He spoke of physics, of the beauty of numbers, and of the infinite potential hidden within the universe and within people. As he finished his speech and the room erupted in applause, his eyes scanned the crowd. Near the back, standing by the exit, was a man in a simple suit. He was older now, with a few more lines around his eyes, but his respectful gaze was unmistakable. It was David Evans, no longer an officer, but a community leader who had come to see the result of a seed planted years ago on a sunlit sidewalk. Evans gave a small, proud nod. Leo nodded back, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The world had tried to judge him by his cover, by the unfounded fears of a neighbor. They had looked at a boy and seen a threat. But what they failed to understand was that you can't measure a mind by the clothes it wears or the neighborhood it walks in. Talent and worth are not confined by stereotypes or defined by prejudice. They are universal, like the laws of physics he so loved. They exist everywhere, in everyone, just waiting for a chance to be seen. It is our duty not to stand in the way with suspicion, but to step aside and sometimes to help clear the path.